You think you can push us around? That was the first thing Linda Monroe shouted through the crackling megaphone, her voice sharp and brittle against the quiet morning air, echoing off the freshly painted mailboxes and manicured lawns. I froze for a second, heart thudding like a piston, inhaling the faint scent of diesel from the patrol cars idling behind her. My wife, Sarah, stood beside me, calm, steady, her hands folded neatly, eyes scanning the scene like a general assessing a battlefield, a tiny smirk tugging at her lips that I somehow caught out of the corner of my eye. The sun was just rising over our cul-de-sac, golden lights spilling across the pavement and glinting off the chrome trim of my truck, but the warm glow did nothing to soften the tension thickening the air. I could hear the distant chirp of birds, but even they seemed hushed, aware of the chaos unfolding in our own driveway. The HOA board members, armed with clipboards and a self-righteous sense of authority, fidgeted nervously, glancing between us and the small fleet of patrol cars parked at odd angles, lights off, but engines humming with a low, threatening growl. Every step Sarah took was measured, deliberate, her boots crunching softly against the gravel, and I realized the juxtaposition was almost cinematic. Them, loud and overconfident. Us, composed and quietly powerful. Linda waved her arms, jabbing the air with her pen, trying to marshal the officers forward, but the hesitation in their stance betrayed uncertainty, a tension that only heightened the surreal quality of the moment. I swallowed hard, tasting the metallic tang of adrenaline as I glanced at the HOA president's face, that blend of entitlement and panic flickering like candlelight against her sharp features. She thought she was in control, that her call to authority was absolute, that the sirens could bend reality to her will. I could almost hear her calculating, running through the rules, the regulations, the HOA bylaws, thinking they were impenetrable, unassailable. And yet, the air was electric with possibility, each second stretching into an eternity, every rustle of paper or faint footstep amplifying the suspense. The soft hum of our neighborhood sprinklers, the faint whiff of freshly cut grass from the lawn across the street. These mundane sounds collided with the tension like two worlds crashing together. I knew, as I shifted my weight slightly, that whatever happened next would change everything, not just for us, but for the entire dynamic of this street. Sarah turned her head slightly, a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement of the plan we had discussed countless times over kitchen counters and back porches, and in that brief movement, I felt the weight of certainty settle over me. The HOA thought they were pushing boundaries, testing limits, enforcing rules that didn't apply, but I could feel it in the precise alignment of Sarah's posture, the controlled rhythm of her breathing, that the balance was about to tip. The moment held, suspended between fear and anticipation, the air thick with expectation, a pulse of possibility that made every nerve in my body stand alert. I breathed it in, the crisp morning air laced with the faint hint of coffee drifting from our neighbor's kitchen, mingling with the smell of gravel and asphalt. And in that sensory tapestry, the story was already unfolding, tension building, the hook already set, waiting for the revelation that would come in just a heartbeat. Sarah has always been the kind of person who notices everything. The way her eyes follow the light shifting across the neighborhood, the subtle changes in the leaves of the maple trees, the rhythm of the sprinklers turning on and off in perfect synchronization. She is meticulous, precise, and when necessary, unyielding, but most people walking past our street only see her smile, calm and approachable, a woman who could easily be mistaken for someone who only keeps an eye on the mailbox and neighborhood flower beds. I watch her now as she stands beside me, hands clasped behind her back, a sense of command radiating quietly without a word spoken. The sun climbs higher, casting a soft golden hue on the asphalt, illuminating every tiny imperfection in the freshly laid driveway, each crack and pebble visible as if the world itself is holding its breath, waiting. I think back to the mornings when we moved in, unpacking boxes, the scent of pine from the new furniture mingling with the faint aroma of coffee and fresh paint, imagining our life here would be peaceful, predictable, safe. Those moments feel like another lifetime now, replaced by the tense hum of engines, the shuffle of feet on gravel, the papers rustling in the wind as the HOA members adjust clipboards nervously, realizing that perhaps Their assumptions about power and authority were premature. Sarah tilts her head slightly, her gaze sweeping the small crowd, noting which officers appear confident, which hesitate, her mind calculating steps ahead, each possibility running through her experience in law enforcement, each reaction mapped out in advance. I breathe in slowly, tasting the crisp morning air, laced with the faint tang of asphalt and the subtle hint of coffee from our neighbor across the street, letting it ground me in the moment. This neighborhood, with its perfect lawns and matching mailboxes, feels smaller somehow, compressed by the tension, yet every detail becomes crucial. The angle of sunlight on the stop sign, the gentle sway of the maple leaves, the faint vibration through the pavement from distant traffic, all forming a network of cues that Sarah reads with effortless precision. I glance at her badge glinting subtly under the light, a reminder that the rules we live by have weight, that authority, real authority, does not announce itself with volume but with presence, and I sense the calm determination in her posture, the quiet confidence that what is right will assert itself naturally. I feel my own heartbeat slow, my senses sharpening, as though the world itself has paused to observe, and I know that whatever happens in the next few moments will not only set the record straight, but also mark a moment of reckoning, a subtle shift in balance where respect for law and order aligns perfectly with the human determination to see fairness served. The air feels thick, electric with anticipation, every sound amplified, every movement noted, and in that suspended moment, I realize the ordinary morning we expected has transformed into a living test of composure, judgment, and the silent, undeniable force of authority. I watch Sarah exchange a brief glance with me, her eyes conveying reassurance and strategy in a single instant, and I understand fully that we are not merely waiting for events to unfold. We are part of the unfolding itself, shaping it with every measured step, every calm breath, every glance, every subtle motion that will define the outcome. The HOA board shuffled closer, clipboards shaking in nervous hands, their confidence beginning to falter as Sarah maintained her calm stance, eyes steady, scanning every movement like a hawk observing the field. I could feel the subtle shift in the air, the tension bending slightly toward our side, every officer exchanging glances, hesitation creeping into their posture. The wind rustled the maple leaves overhead, carrying the faint scent of morning dew and freshly cut grass, a serene contrast to the rigid formality of the scene unfolding on the driveway. Sarah took a slow step forward, the soft crunch of her boots against gravel cutting through the murmurs of the HOA members, drawing their attention like a magnet, and I realized how every minute detail mattered, the cadence of her movement, the tilt of her head, the precise alignment of her badge catching the sunlight, signaling authority without a single raised voice. I adjusted my own stance beside her, breathing in sync, heart steadying as I absorbed her unspoken strategy, feeling the power of presence more than anything else. The HOA president attempted to speak, her voice a mix of urgency and irritation, but the words faltered under the weight of scrutiny, each syllable exposed to the calm yet commanding gaze of Sarah. Papers fluttered in the breeze as she subtly gestured, directing attention, organizing thought and movement without raising her voice, the law itself seeming to follow her every motion, bending quietly to the authority she embodied. I watched neighbors across the street pause, their morning routines halted as the subtle choreography of control played out, the sunlight glinting off windows and sidewalks, catching the edges of papers, clipboards, and badges, creating a tableau where order and precision met chaos and uncertainty. Every minor sound, the click of a pen, the faint rustle of leaves, the distant hum of an engine, became a beat in the rhythm of the moment, a part of the narrative unfolding with cinematic clarity. Sarah shifted her weight, just enough to signal a new move, her eyes narrowing slightly as if scanning for hidden assumptions, testing boundaries invisibly, and I felt a surge of admiration and calm in equal measure, understanding that this was a test of patience, observation, and leverage. That power is most potent when unspoken yet undeniable. The HOA members murmured among themselves, a subtle tremor in their previously assertive demeanor, and I knew that each tiny gesture, each precise pause, each measured word from Sarah was reshaping the energy of the street, redirecting the authority in her favor without overt confrontation. I could see the tension in Linda Monroe's shoulders, the slight tightening of her jaw, the quick adjustment of her posture, all signs that the balance had begun to shift, that the unassuming strength of law, combined with measured presence, was quietly asserting itself. The neighborhood seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with anticipation, the golden sunlight blending with the shadow of uncertainty, every moment stretching longer as the unspoken rules of authority played out. And I knew that we were moving toward resolution not through volume, but through clarity, precision, and the unwavering embodiment of what is right. The air seemed to thicken as the HOA board hesitated, their eyes flicking between Sarah and the officers, searching for some sign of leverage, some loophole they could exploit, but finding none. Every subtle shift of her stance, every quiet exhale, communicated authority and control, a language they were not equipped to read. I watched as she reached into her jacket, the badge catching the sunlight at just the right angle, a silent announcement of legitimacy that needed no words, and I could feel the unspoken power ripple across the driveway, bending the tension toward resolution. Papers rustled in the hands of the HOA members, their notes and citations suddenly feeling fragile, like they could crumble under the weight of scrutiny, and I noticed the way Linda Monroe's shoulders tensed. The sharp inhale she tried to mask, betraying her inner calculation. Sarah's eyes never left the crowd, methodically scanning, cataloging each expression, each movement, turning their overconfidence into a strategic advantage. I could hear the faint hum of engines from the street, the distant bark of a dog, the gentle swish of the sprinklers, mundane sounds layered over the extraordinary moment, heightening every sense, sharpening every perception. She gestured subtly, directing the flow of attention without a word, allowing the officers to step back, creating space where order could assert itself naturally, and I felt the calm certainty in her movements, the meticulous choreography that transformed hesitation into compliance. The sunlight glinted off clipboards, the brass nameplates of the HOA board catching fleeting rays, momentarily dazzling their owners, and I realized how every small visual detail contributed to the rhythm of control. Every glance and tilt of a head a part of the silent communication that governed the interaction. My hands rested lightly at my sides, feeling the texture of the gravel beneath my boots, noting how each sound, footsteps, breathing, paper shifting, was amplified, a part of the atmosphere that hung between authority and defiance. Sarah adjusted her stance slightly, a pivot that directed attention, a shift that subtly reminded the observers of the boundaries they had overstepped. I could see the micro-expressions, the tiny involuntary reactions, the flicker of doubt in eyes, the tightening of fingers around pens, the shuffle of feet, that revealed their realization that the balance had shifted. It was a lesson in presence and perception, demonstrating that command does not require volume, that authority can manifest in patience, observation, and the quiet alignment of action with law. I breathed in slowly, tasting the crisp air, the faint tang of dew on grass mingling with the residual scent of asphalt and engine oil, and I understood that the ordinary morning had become a demonstration of the power inherent in restraint, precision, and the steady assertion of rightful authority. The neighborhood seemed to watch in suspended anticipation, every subtle gesture magnified, and I knew that the path forward was clear. The tension would resolve not with shouting or confrontation, but with the deliberate, unwavering application of lawful command, each movement guiding the outcome toward balance, fairness, and the inevitable enforcement of order. The HOA members shifted uneasily, whispering among themselves, the clipboards that had once felt like armor now trembling in their hands, and I could see the uncertainty ripple through their ranks. Sarah stood slightly forward, her posture unyielding, hands lightly resting at her sides, eyes sweeping across the group with quiet command. The morning light glinted off her badge, throwing reflections across the asphalt, catching the edges of the papers and clipboards in a way that drew attention to the authority she carried effortlessly. I inhaled slowly, the crisp scent of early morning dew mixed with the faint aroma of freshly mown grass grounding me, making every sound, the distant hum of engines, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot, the rustle of leaves overhead, more pronounced, more meaningful in the tense quiet that hung over the street. Linda Monroe opened her mouth to speak again, attempting to reassert control, but the words faltered under Sarah's gaze, precise and unwavering, like a measurement taken with exacting care, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The HOA members shifted their weight, each movement betraying hesitation, a subtle realization dawning that the leverage they assumed they had was slipping away, and I noticed the minute details, the way fingers gripped pens, the flutter of papers in the slight breeze, the faint scuff of shoes against asphalt, all magnified in the charged silence. Sarah's voice finally cut through, calm but firm, outlining clearly the legal boundaries and the responsibilities of every party present, and I watched the effect immediately as the officers relaxed, standing slightly back, recognizing the authority she carried not through volume, but through clarity and presence. The energy in the air shifted, like a tide turning slowly but inevitably, each HOA member processing the subtle cues, the quiet reinforcement of order that required no shouting, just careful, deliberate communication. I observed Linda Monroe's expressions, a mix of frustration and dawning comprehension, as she realized that her assumptions about authority and intimidation were mistaken, that the rules she had relied upon were now under the scrutiny of someone who understood them fully and held the power to enforce them. Sarah's gestures, slight but purposeful, guided the interaction, creating space for comprehension, allowing each person to understand the consequences of overstepping, all without raising a single hand in aggression. The morning sun climbed steadily, the golden light accentuating the sharp edges of papers, badges, and even the subtle lines of anticipation in the HOA members' faces, and I felt the weight of the moment settle into a kind of quiet inevitability. Every breath, every glance, every slight adjustment in posture contributed to the narrative unfolding, the story of authority, patience, and precision playing out across our driveway. I realized fully then that this was a demonstration not of confrontation, but of control, not through volume or force, but through presence, knowledge, and the careful application of lawful power, and I could see it settling into the minds of all present. The balance had shifted, and the lesson was clear, measured, and unmistakable. As the morning light settled fully over the cul-de-sac, Sarah began moving with subtle authority, gesturing toward the officers and HOA board members in a sequence that seemed almost choreographed, each movement deliberate, measured, and purposeful. Her calm voice carried across the driveway, outlining the precise limits of what could and could not be done, and I felt the air shift around us, every observer suddenly aware of the rules they had overlooked. I watched the HOA members exchange worried glances, the clipboards in their hands no longer a shield, but a fragile record of their assumptions being tested, each paper flapping lightly in the soft breeze, reflecting the sun in a way that drew attention to their incongruity with the actual law. The officers relaxed slightly, but their posture remained attentive, aware that authority had taken a visible and undeniable form, not through volume, but through presence and clarity. Sarah's eyes scanned the crowd methodically, registering every small reaction, every twitch of a hand, every hesitation, noting which gestures revealed uncertainty and which indicated residual overconfidence, and she allowed her calm, yet firm instructions to settle over the scene, creating an invisible framework of order that everyone could understand. I felt my own pulse synchronize with the rhythm of the moment, each breath measured, each glance purposeful, absorbing the cues she had established, and I understood how the ordinary elements of the neighborhood, the hum of distant traffic, the soft rustle of the leaves overhead, the faint scent of fresh grass mingling with asphalt, had become part of the tension, highlighting the contrast between normalcy and the unfolding assertion of authority. Linda Monroe fidgeted with her notes, the corners of papers curling slightly as if mirroring her growing unease, while other HOA members shifted from foot to foot, their expressions flickering with recognition that the balance had changed and that their assumptions about control had been misplaced. Sarah's voice carried over them, calm but unyielding, citing specific regulations, referencing official documents, and pointing out the responsibilities of each individual present, every word precise, measured, and deliberate, leaving no room for misunderstanding or evasion. The sun glinted off her badge again, catching the attention of everyone. A visual punctuation to the authority embedded in her presence, reinforcing the legal weight behind her instructions. I could see the subtle relief creeping into the officers' expressions as they began to align with her direction, and I noted how every small detail, the angle of a glance, the tilt of a head, the careful step across the gravel, added to the narrative of control, the story unfolding through movement, posture, and focus rather than volume. The street seemed suspended in anticipation, every neighbor watching, every subtle shift in light and shadow emphasizing the clarity and precision with which order was being restored, and I understood that this moment was a demonstration of measured power, of authority exercised not through confrontation, but through knowledge, presence, and deliberate, unwavering action. Each second stretched, each sound amplified, and the reality of lawful power asserting itself in the quiet strength of Sarah's command became tangible, undeniable, and, most importantly, effective. Sarah's hands moved with quiet precision, pulling folders from the cruiser and handing them to the HOA members, each document carefully marked, official, and unambiguous, outlining exactly what actions were permissible and what boundaries could not be crossed. I could see the tension in their shoulders ease slightly as the clarity of law replaced their uncertainty, their murmurs dropping into near silence, the sound of papers rustling blending with the soft hum of early morning traffic. The sunlight reflected off the glass windows of the nearby houses, scattering light across the driveway, and creating patterns that seemed to emphasize the meticulous order Sarah was enforcing, every ray highlighting the contrast between previous chaos and present control. I watched as she spoke, her voice calm, deliberate, measured, each word carrying weight, each instruction precise, and I felt a sense of reassurance settle over the scene. The officers adjusting their positions, nodding subtly, acknowledging the authority she wielded effortlessly. The HOA board members shifted nervously, realizing that the assumptions they had relied on were no longer valid. Their confidence replaced with a growing awareness of the legal framework guiding every step Sarah took, and the careful documentation she produced only reinforced the inevitability of compliance. I noticed the faint creak of clipboards, the scratch of pens on paper, the shuffle of shoes across gravel, all magnified in the quiet intensity of the moment, and the neighborhood seemed to hold its collective breath, aware that an equilibrium was being established, one governed not by shouting or confrontation, but by lawful, deliberate command. Every subtle gesture from Sarah, a tilt of the head, a pause in speech, a nod, communicated authority more powerfully than words alone, turning what might have been a chaotic exchange into a structured sequence of compliance and understanding. I could smell the faint tang of dew on the grass, the earthy aroma of the gravel driveway, mixed with a hint of asphalt from the street, and these ordinary details grounded the moment, making the legal and procedural clarity even more tangible. The officers' stances softened, the HOA members' expressions shifted from defiance to recognition, the faint sound of neighborhood activity, birds chirping, leaves rustling, distant lawnmowers, blended with the unfolding order, creating a sense of normalcy resuming under the careful guidance of rightful authority. I felt the calm strength in Sarah, the deliberate rhythm of her actions, the subtle reinforcement of boundaries and expectations, and understood fully that the resolution did not come through force or volume, but through clarity, presence, and the steady application of law. As the scene settled, the sunlight warmed the driveway, highlighting the edges of papers and badges, casting long shadows that seemed to mark the end of the confrontation, a silent acknowledgement that authority, when exercised thoughtfully and correctly, restores balance effortlessly, and I realized that this was more than just a neighborhood encounter. It was a demonstration of measured power, patience, and the quiet, undeniable weight of lawful action. The tension that had hung over the driveway for what felt like an eternity began to dissipate as the HOA members finally absorbed the full weight of the situation, their voices lowering, their postures shifting from defiance to reluctant acknowledgement. Sarah moved with deliberate grace, handing out official notices and calmly explaining each one, the words carrying authority but no trace of anger, measured in a cadence that made every instruction unmistakable. I watched as the officers adjusted their stance, now clearly aligned with her direction, nodding subtly at each point she made. The hum of their engines and the faint click of their equipment blending into the background, as if marking the rhythm of compliance. The HOA board members shuffled in place, flipping through the papers she had distributed, their initial certainty eroding with every clear, precise explanation of boundaries, responsibilities, and legal consequences. I could smell the fresh-cut grass mingled with the warm asphalt and faint coffee drifting from a neighbor's kitchen, sensory details grounding the extraordinary moment in familiar, everyday life, making the assertion of authority feel both natural and undeniable. Sunlight reflected off badges, clipboards, and even the glint of eyeglasses, accentuating every movement, every subtle gesture that Sarah made, reinforcing the visual story of measured control and careful management of the situation. I felt the quiet strength in her presence, the way she balanced attention to detail with the broader perspective of responsibility, and I understood that this was not just enforcement but education, a demonstration of proper procedure and fairness. The subtle creak of shoes, the shuffle of papers, the faint hum of distant traffic, even the whisper of wind through the trees, all contributed to a heightened awareness of each moment, making the slow unfolding of compliance feel like a carefully orchestrated sequence where order gradually replaced chaos. I noticed Linda Monroe glance sideways at her peers, recognition dawning that their assumptions had been flawed, their reliance on intimidation ineffective, and that the authority Sarah carried was both real and inescapable. Each step she took, each word she spoke, further reinforced the boundaries, the officers and HOA members following her lead without hesitation, the atmosphere gradually shifting from tension to structured understanding. The neighborhood seemed to exhale collectively, a quiet acknowledgement that order had been restored not through confrontation, but through knowledge, presence, and deliberate action. I observed the balance solidify, every minute movement adding clarity, every glance and gesture reinforcing the legal and ethical framework Sarah had established, until the driveway no longer felt like a battleground but a space of calm resolution, where every participant knew their role and the consequences of overstepping. The sunlight deepened, casting long shadows across the asphalt, highlighting the edges of papers, badges, and clipboards, signaling a moment of completion, a resolution achieved through patience, precision, and the steady, undeniable force of rightful authority, leaving the HOA members aware, respectful, and fully aligned with the rules that governed their actions. The street finally began to feel ordinary again, the early morning tension replaced by a quiet sense of resolution, yet every detail carried the memory of the encounter, the way Sarah had moved, spoken, and commanded without a single raised voice. I walked alongside her, the crunch of gravel under my boots steady and reassuring, as she handed back the last of the official papers, ensuring every HOA member understood their responsibilities and the legal boundaries clearly. The sunlight had shifted, painting warm, golden streaks across the asphalt and the perfectly trimmed lawns, highlighting the edges of clipboards, badges, and official notices, the calm aftermath of authority having been exercised with precision. I could feel the subtle shift in the energy of the neighborhood, neighbors peeking from windows, sensing the balance restored, the quiet yet undeniable reinforcement of order. Sarah adjusted her jacket, the badge catching the sun, and I could see the small, satisfied nods from officers who had witnessed the controlled resolution, their posture relaxing as they recognized the power of clarity, law, and measured presence. Linda Monroe and her board members moved quietly, flipping through the documents one last time, the realization sinking in that their overconfidence and assumptions had been carefully, methodically corrected, leaving no room for misinterpretation or further challenge. The faint hum of distant traffic, the rustle of leaves in the trees, the subtle scent of cut grass and fresh asphalt, all blended into the background, a serene counterpoint to the earlier intensity, grounding the moment in normalcy and emphasizing the contrast between chaos and structured authority. I noticed Sarah's eyes sweep the scene one final time, a precise scan that ensured all instructions had been received and understood, every gesture calculated, each small motion reinforcing the boundaries she had set, confirming compliance through presence rather than aggression. The neighborhood exhaled in subtle ways, The collective awareness of right and order settling over the street. The ordinary sounds of suburban life gradually filling the spaces where tension had once resided. I felt a deep sense of relief and satisfaction, recognizing that authority, when executed with patience, clarity, and lawful precision, creates outcomes that are durable, respected, and ultimately inevitable. Sunlight glinted off her badge again, a symbol not of intimidation but of rightful control, a reminder that power does not shout. It asserts itself with quiet certainty and deliberate action. I glanced at Sarah, the calm strength in her eyes reflecting a morning that had begun with chaos but ended with balance restored, the lessons of patience, strategy, and lawful authority leaving an indelible impression on everyone who had witnessed the unfolding events. As we stepped back from the driveway, the street felt lighter, the officers relaxed into routine, the HOA members subdued yet aware, and the entire scene held a subtle satisfaction that comes from order being rightfully established, a quiet acknowledgement that justice, patience, and precise action are more powerful than any volume or display of force could ever be.